So in this video, we will talk about working in a startup versus a product company versus a services company versus a MANG company. I was the server admin, I was the support guy, I was the operations dude, I was the infrastructure admin, I was the help desk, and of course I was the DevOps engineer. That was my day job. How much stock options are you getting? What is the vesting period? What are the buyback rates? What are the terms and conditions? So the more you stay in a product company, the more valuable you become for them because of the product history that you have. So I could physically hold that piece of software, physically hold the disk and say, I did the sanity testing on this. I created this build. And I've seen a lot of people get comfortable and stay in product companies for a very long time just because इतना fight क्यों मारना यार, life ठीक ही तो चल रही है. The more varied experience you have, the more valuable you become for a services company. Only call that I had to make at home was, यार वो suitcase में कचरे डाल देना. You can put me in front of any customer, anywhere in the world, any problem, and I can. Hello girls and boys, how's it going? So in this video, we will talk about working in a startup versus a product company versus a services company versus a MANG company, and which one could be best for you. I will share my personal experience having worked in most of these kind of companies, and I will take some industry data as well. I'll tell you what's good, what's not so good, and how you should choose the right company for you. You should watch this video very carefully if you have a couple of offers and you can't decide what company to join. If you want to know the behind the scenes working of these kind of companies. If you're just the curious kind and want to understand what happens in the software industry in general. One simple measure of when you should start looking out for a change. A simple technique that I use is when I am not excited to go to work several weeks in a row. Once in a while, it is perfectly okay, When you've got beaten by the boss, when you've had a bad day at work, you don't feel like going to work. And that's perfectly okay. But when that happens for weeks on weeks, for months on months, there is something to check about. Mental health is more important than anything else in the world. So watch till the end, and I'll also share an algorithm on how to choose the right company for yourself based on your current circumstances. Now before I start the video, I have an announcement to make. I've been getting a lot of requests for one-to-one mentorship. Now the thing is, with a full-time job and with so many side hustles going on, I'm just not getting the time to open up TopMate for bookings. However, I respect that you were looking for my time and I want to honor that. So as a result of that, what I've decided to do is, from this video, I will pick up the top 2 comments and then I will schedule a 30-minute one-to-one session with those people completely free of charge. What do you have to do to win that? A very simple thing. You have to answer one question in maximum 2 sentences. What's the question? Pick a video of mine and tell me what did you implement after watching that video and what impact did it have? What changed after you implemented what you learned from that video? And when you're making that comment, just add the word mentorship at the beginning. And I will watch for 3 or 4 days, and over the weekend, I will decide who the top 2 winners are, and then I'll contact you on DM and schedule a one-to-one 30-minute session with you absolutely free. So let's go fill in the comments. If you're new here, my name is Puri and I have over 20 years of experience having worked in DevOps, software engineering, cloud, build, release, that kind of stuff. I'm currently Associate VP DevSecOps SRE with a leading system integrator. You can connect with me on LinkedIn to know more about my profile. So strap on your seatbelts, let's get started. So before I get into the details, a disclaimer. The advice that I'm about to give in this video, the sharing that I'm about to do here, is generic advice. It may or may not apply to the organization that you're currently working or are looking to work on. This is based purely on my experience, having worked in product companies, in startups, in large organizations, and this is also based on the industry data that is freely available. If you are taking a decision whether to join a particular organization or not, do not take the decision purely on the basis of just this video and what I say here. Know more about the organization, talk to friends who are already in that organization, and if possible, talk to somebody who's in the team that you're joining. Because even within a large organization, multiple teams could have variations in culture. And like they say, you do not leave an organization, you leave a boss. So with that disclaimer out of the way, let's get into it. Let's talk about startups. So I've worked in 2 startups for about 5.5, 6 years. Here are 3 things that are great about startups. Number 1 is absolute freedom to do your own thing and minimal hierarchy. Because it's a startup, it will be small in size, probably between 5 to 10, 15 people. And everybody is hired to do what they do best. And because of that, there is probably nobody who's telling you exactly what to do. You're free to do things, you're free to experiment, you're free to maybe even choose the technology stack that you're working on. So I remember when I had joined a startup several years back, all their infrastructure was on-premise. They were renting stuff from a private cloud provider. We migrated all of that into Rackspace because good old days, Rackspace was very cool. And then after some time, when Amazon came along big and they started offering a lot of discounts, we moved everything from Rackspace to Amazon. Now imagine doing this thing in a large enterprise, 2 big migrations over the span of 1.5 years. Not possible, not even you can dream of it. So it gives you that flexibility. Number 2, there are typically no boundaries of this is what you can do. In one of the startups, I was the server admin, I was the support guy, I was the operations dude, I was the infrastructure admin, I was the help desk, and of course I was the DevOps engineer. That was my day job. But I was doing all of this. I had keys to the server room, I had access to all the hardware in the company, and it felt like a boss. You know what I'm talking about. Number 3, and probably the most important fun part about working in a startup, it gives you access to founder and the CTO. You would probably know them as friends. What happens as a result of that is you learn directly from the best. You also learn a lot of things beyond technology. You learn about the business side of things. You probably learn how to pitch your idea to investors. You learn about funding. You learn about the startup ecosystem. You learn about what are private equity funds, how do they operate, how do you make a good pitch. All of that you can learn if you're a slightly senior person and if you have an interest in that area. So those are the great things about working in startups. Now I'm going to tell you 3 things to be aware of about startups. Number 1, and this is the biggest one, they typically do not make you rich. You hear a lot of stories about people joining startups and getting equities or stock options worth lakhs, even crores. The fine print in that is there is a lot of nuance in that. How much stock options are you getting? What is the vesting period? What are the buyback rates? What are the terms and conditions? Understand all of that carefully. And even after understanding all of that, you should know that more than 90% of the stock options are never ever vested. I also have a bunch of stock options which are in my email somewhere, some papers which are lying in some drawer somewhere. They are of really no value because nothing happened. Number 2, they give you too much freedom with little direction. Now for some people this is great, but for some this can be unnerving because nobody is telling you what to do, nobody is giving you guidance, and that can become difficult for some people, so you should be careful about that. It's a different mindset to work in a startup. Number 3, as you can imagine, they can be bloody unpredictable. When you join a startup, every founder, every CTO will tell you, yeah, don't worry, we are very well funded. You know, this guy is on the board, that guy is a dear friend of mine. We have enough runway for the next 1 year. They will all tell you that. do your own research. If the startup has been around for a while, there will be public information of who has funded them, how much the funding has been, how much is their runway. A very good question to ask is, if we stop getting funding from now on, how long can we last? And if you ask that question, a good founder and CTO, an ethical one, will tell you the truth. Hope they tell you that. Because in my experience, I have been in startups that were well funded, but suddenly some shit happened somewhere and there were salary reductions, there were paused salaries. Because I was one of the senior guys, we decided to pause our salaries in between for a while. It can be financially very taxing. And the fundings can dry out very, very quickly due to a lot of reasons which are not in anybody's control. So take this financial aspect into consideration before you take a call on joining a startup. Alright, so let's talk about product companies. Now, some typical example of product companies are companies like Amdocs, Cisco, Intel, IBM, VMware, things like that. What are the three great things about working in product companies? Number one, they value longevity. What does it mean? It's not uncommon to find people working in these kind of product companies for 10, 15, 20, even 30 years. Why is that? Because they value your product knowledge and they value history. For example, when I was working with Siemens PLM in Pune, there was a lot of people who had been working even at that time in the early 2000s for about 15-20 years. And for a lot of things in these kind of products, it is very important to know what happened 3 release back, 5 release back, because that impacts the decisions that you have to take today. So the more you stay in a product company, the more valuable you become for them because of the product history that you have. And that is something that just cannot be bought from outside. It's not about your experience. It's about being there and understanding how that product has evolved over a period of time. So that's very important for them. Number two, you get a lot of depth in technology and ownership. Now, because you can imagine if you've been, let's say, with Siemens PLM for about 10-15 years, then you know everything about that product. You know it inside out. If you're a developer, you've probably coded a lot of the functions, you've contributed a lot in them. If you're from the testing background, you have tested the heck out of a software. If you are in the build area, then you know how these softwares get built and what file went into what version. So you get to go very, very deep in technology in a product company. Let me give you a fun example about ownership. In the early 2001-2, I used to work in a company called Neilsoft, which is based in Pune. And we used to work with Autodesk projects and we used to do localization. What that means is Autodesk makes products in the CAD/CAM space. And one of the products we used to work was called Autodesk MDT, Mechanical Desktop, Inventor, and Academ. These were the 3 softwares that we would work on. And over a period of time, I started off as a build engineer, and then one part of my role was to do the final check of the files that got uploaded into an FTP server and something called the SPD group. The software product and delivery group would take that final set of files, burn it onto a CD and ship the CD. Those were the days when software would come to you on a CD and you will insert that CD and install the software from there. Great days. What ended up happening was that for every product that we shipped, they would send us the final, we used to call it RTM disk, the release to manufacturer disk. So I could physically hold that piece of software, physically hold the disk and say, I did the sanity testing on this. I created this build. I created this product. I pressed enter on that script which created this product. It was a great sense of achievement and ownership. Number 3, advantage of working in a product company is you build lasting relationships. Because imagine working on the same product with probably the same team for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. You become bonds and friends for life. In the early 2000s, a famous circle in the CAD/CAM space in Pune was moving from Neilsoft to Geometric Software to Siemens PLM to PTC. These were the only 4 companies where people moved around, and if you were in that group, you would invariably know anybody and everybody in these 4 companies. It was a fun time. 3 things to be aware of about product companies. Number 1, as you can imagine, the technology stack doesn't change very often. So you end up working in the same tech stack for years at an end. Now, if you're a kind of person who gets bored very easily, who wants to work on the latest, greatest, sexiest tool out there, it's gonna be tough. Of course, there are modernization journeys, and of course, product companies employ the best software, but it will not change every couple of months, it will not change every year. It takes a long time to change the stack in a product company because there's a lot of dependencies and there's a lot at stake. Number 2, things move at their own pace. Now, of course, there are product companies which are very nimble, very agile, but as a general rule, things take a lot of time to change in a product organization because the product has gone out to customers. You can't just mess around with things. There are millions and billions of dollars at stake. So they have their own way of working. They have their own way of making change. You have to learn and appreciate that. The third thing, the danger of stagnancy. And I say this with a lot of caution, but people who work for very long time in product companies tend to work in one stack and tend to get habituated to that sort of a work environment. Even when I came out of Siemens PLM after about, I think, 6.5 years, it gave me a culture shock because from a well-established, well-oiled machinery of Siemens PLM, I joined a startup. So it's a complete culture shock for me for a couple of weeks. But you get addicted almost to the comfort of a software company. Get used to the predictability of a software company. You start to like the work environment, your familiarity of your tools, of your people, of your work environment, and that is a little difficult when you decide to move on. And I've seen a lot of people get comfortable and stay in product companies for a very, very long time just because itna fight kyun marna yaar, life theek hi to chal rahi hai. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's just a mindset that you need to be aware of. Okay, let's talk about services company now. You know, companies like TCS, Accenture, Infy, Capgemini, Cognizant, even the big 4, the Deloitte, the EY, the KPMG, PwC, those kind of things as well. Because they are into consulting services, similar bracket, right? 3 things that are great about services company. Number 1, they value experience. The more varied experience you have, the more valuable you become for a services company. Why? Because your experience gives them more business, gives them more dollar, you earn them more dollar, you are more favorable for that company. Number 2, you get to work in a lot of width of technology. Why? Because every 6 months, 1 year, 2 year, your project will change. Most probably your technology will change, or you will get into adjacent technologies. If you're good in AWS, you will work in different areas of AWS. You might work at one point on EC2 and those kind of things. In the second project, you might be doing serverless. In the third one, you might be doing containerization. In the fourth one, you might be doing Azure. Because if you know AWS, how difficult can Azure be? Some logic, right? But overall, if you work for a couple of years in a services company, you will go wide in technology, and that's a great thing if that's the kind of work that excites you. Number 3, and most important while working in a services industry, you learn how to deal with customers. And this becomes more important as you scale up in your career and as you start managing engagements either from a technology standpoint or from a managerial leadership standpoint or even from a business standpoint. You learn how to deal with tough customers, easy customers, and you get to travel a lot. When I was with Zensar in my previous stint, for about 1.5 years, I always had 2 suitcases packed. One with warm clothes, snow clothes, the other one with not so warm clothes. The snow clothes for Europe and UK, the warm ones maybe for a bit of US and South Africa. And the only call that I had to make at home was, यार वो सूटकेस में कच्चे डाल देना, गरम वाले में के ठंडे वाले में, because that's the only thing you need, right? Fresh. Everything else already packed and ready to go. And there have been so many instances where I've gone to office as normal. My boss has called me and said, hey dude, today evening you're leaving for this country. What are you doing? What is the assignment? I will tell you on the way. Go get your bookings done. Go get your flight arrangements done. Go home early. Evening 6 o'clock, the cab is coming to pick you up. When you're driving to Bombay, I'll tell you what you're doing. It was fun. And that's the period where I have learned the most. And today, because of that experience, you can put me in front of any customer, anywhere in the world, any problem, and I can hold the conversation and do a bloody good meeting. It has come from that experience. You know, one of my bosses used to say, how do you know that you are a good consultant? You know that if you still remember the smell of your airport. That's how you know you're a good consultant. How do you know that you have a good relationship with your customer? When the air hostess knows you by name, that's when you know. Why? Because you're making so many flights, you're traveling so much. The air hostess knows you and you're a friend with the air hostess. Golden words to live by. 3 things to be aware of when working in a services company. Number 1, because it is services, you have to keep the services current and updated with what's going on in the market. Which means you have to be constantly upskilling yourself on what is happening in the market. For example, right now, as the head of DevSecOps and SRE at Zensar, I'm constantly learning about what is happening in AI, what is the new models getting released, what are they good at, what are they not so good at. It's a constant upskilling cycle and it moves very fast. And you even have to go a couple of steps ahead of the industry to be able to extrapolate what will happen next and create your service offering like that. So it's a constant upskilling thing. Number 2, you have to learn to handle 100 threads all at the same time. You have to learn to deal with pressure, with customer, with sales, with delivery, with margin, with resourcing, all at the same time. This is more applicable as you move higher up the ladder. In general, in a services company, you will have to deal with the multiple things all at once. So get used to it. Number 3, not everything is in your control in the services company. There could be massive plans of expansion in a country and a war happens there. You have to then recalibrate everything, go do strategy 2. Could be natural calamity. There could be a pandemic. Who knows? But life in a services company is fast, is exciting, is very adventurous. If that's up your alley, that's where you should be. Now let's talk about the MANG companies, the Meta, Amazon, Netflix and Google. Now I personally haven't directly worked for any of them, but I have a lot of friends who work in these companies and obviously I've interacted with these companies directly. So this section is based on that experience and not a personal experience. So 3 things that are great about MANG. There's a lot more than good food and perks. I'm sure you've seen those unboxing videos of joining Google, the Bada monitor, the iPhone, all of that is great. But there's a lot more to working in these kind of companies. You get to learn how to design systems at scale. You understand how your architecture should be so that it can operate across the globe at that level of scale. So it's a very different skill set that comes out when you work with these kind of organizations. Number 2, you would typically work with an international team. What that means is, in a team of let's say 5 to 10 people, a couple of your colleagues could be from Europe, from some US, some from Eastern Europe. So you will get to understand a lot of cultural nuances. Maybe you get to travel to meet these people. It's a great experience to work with a multicultural team. It's a very different experience. Everybody should try that. Number 3, you get to attend a lot of conferences and events if you are in that sort of a role. They send you to a lot of places. You have a lot of fun. 3 things to be aware of about MANG. Things are not always so rosy. A lot of people that I know that work in MANG companies actually are working in some shape or form of a support role. They are not designing the large complex enterprise systems. They are doing back-end work. Now, I am saying that very cautiously because a lot of good work is also happening in these MANG places in India. But so is a lot of maintenance work, so is a lot of support work. So take that with a pinch of salt. Number 2, minimal guidance. Typically in these organizations, there's nobody to micromanage you. There's nobody to tell you exactly what you're supposed to do. Forget every day, every week, even once in a month, maybe you'll have a one-to-one with your manager who might be sitting in another country, doesn't really understand the cultural nuances of India. So you can feel a little lost. I know in some organizations, you even have to go and find your next project yourself. You have to market yourself internally. That can be tough for a couple of people. Number 3, the most important thing. The fun and the excitement of working in a MANG eventually wears off. The good food will wear off, the perks will wear off. Ultimately, what matters is the work you do, the boss you have, the colleagues that you have. So don't just join the MANG for the tag. It will wear out in a couple of months. Join it for the kind of work that you do and the kind of skill sets that you can potentially learn. So to conclude, there is no one answer for which company you should join. There are positives and not so positives of each kind of an organization, and they really depend on what kind of a person you are, what kind of stage of life you are at, what you're looking for, and what resonates with you. I've tried to give you the highs and the lows of everything and try to complete picture, giving you my experience of working across this organization. To give you an algorithm, it is very, very simple. Number 1, get a job. If you don't have a job today, then you don't bloody worry whether it's a services, it's a product. First thing is get a job. Get the first one that you can get. Second, get a good job. If you're already in a job, if you are in a toxic environment, your mental health is getting affected for weeks in a row, take immediate action, move out. If that's not the case, you're looking for a better role, a better salary, think about the options and then get into a good job. Step 3, get into your dream job. Whatever it is, whether it's the MANGs of the world, whether it's a big product company, whatever is your dream, go in, try that for a while. And overall, if I have to summarize in my 24 years of experience, I have done product companies, I have done startups, I have done services, and I have been around the room. If there was one thing I could tell you, you should try a bit of everything. Only then you will know whether it works for you or it doesn't. Have fun, experiment, nothing is final. If you join a company, you don't like it for whatever reason, it doesn't work for you. As long as you are learning new things, as long as you have upskilled yourself, you can always move around. And that's perfectly fine. I have a playlist here which will talk about how to create a winning resume, how to do an interview preparation. I'll link it in the comments. Have a look at that. All the best.